we make one simple promise: bring on top property experts to talk about all things property investing. And this week is no difference. We have brought on Christie Davis, who is a massive property investor and massive legend who runs a mortgage broking firm. And we don't just talk about the basics, right? We're actually talking about solving a problem here, because property investing is now a game of finance. We all know that, but it's now becoming more and more and more about finance. So it's structured, sophisticated property mortgage broker is becoming more and more key. So that's why we wanted to get him on. We're talking all about how to solve the problem by optimizing our borrowing capacity and our cash. How do we optimize this stuff? Some of the key mistakes that first-time investors are making, but not even first-time investors, like people with 2, 3, 4, like how do we break through and get that next properties? Any tips and strategies that we can reduce, increase our borrowing capacity, reduce our outgoings? And then what are some of the questions that we should be asking ourselves? Because one of the questions that we hear all the time in the group is, where's the best place to buy? But if you start with that question, it really actually screws you up later down the line. So what are the key questions that we need to be talking about? And then he gets on a whiteboard and shows us what debt recycling is. So I'm sure you've heard of this term floating around there. And we go deep into detail. He gets on the whiteboard and explains it so simply that you can, potentially save $4,500 a year. It's ridiculous. Hey everyone, my name is Joe Tucker, and together with Jeff Miles, we created Oz Property Investors, Australia's largest property investment group. We got over 75,000 members. It's unreal. Each week we bring these top experts. So let's jump into this session with Christie Davis and go through what he does at Attila Wealth. So what is the lending problem? We open this saying we want to kind of look at the big lending problem and get to that. So what is the big lending problem? How would we kind of define that? Because I think that'll talk to some of the stuff we're chatting to now.
Yeah, I think people look, naturally 13 rate rises has limited people's borrowing capacities. There's no doubt about that. Look, I saw one question in the group earlier, which was, what does someone do at 100K income? Yeah, I'll be loving it too.
Sorry, go on. What does someone do at 100K income?
100K income, and what 100K income will let you borrow, pre-13 rate rises versus what it does now is significantly different. I'll put that into context. COVID, we're probably doing at least 7, sometimes 8 times people's gross annual incomes in terms of borrowing capacity. Right now, it sits about 4.2 to 4.5. General rule of thumb in borrowing capacity multiple. So someone on 100K income can borrow circa 450, for example, give or take. Yeah. And I guess everything we're discussing here is general in nature and not intended to give advice, right? So, so I mean that's the big. There we go. That to me, like the borrowing capacity part is generally the biggest piece of the puzzle when people are so eager and hungry to keep buying property, but now their borrowing capacity is the thing that's limiting them. It's like, how do we find ways to overcome this? So we're looking at, is it bank selection? Is it releasing more equity? Is it, hey, move in with mum and dad for a certain period of time, drop the rent, for example? That's one option. The other option is, can we strip out everything that's non-essential, i.e. credit cards, personal loans, HEX balances, buy now, pay later? Like you look at all these expenses, private health gets factored in. Not that you want to get rid of it, but it should say you factor that in. Or if you've got a strata titled property, some banks will factor in the strata costs each quarter and add that as an expense, whereas 3, 5, 7 years ago, some of these factors, no one cared what your credit card limit was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, but now that's like, that's the bane of our existence. And I'm not sure, maybe we can ask in the group, how much do you think a $10,000 credit card reduces your borrowing capacity by? Because that would surprise most people as well. Yeah. So I don't know if anyone can answer that question.
Maybe are you seeking people to come and join Attila?
Yeah. Well, it's super interesting because you never think about this stuff when you're kind of starting out in the property investing world. It's like, how much, like credit card, who cares? That's none of your business. I do it for the points. I get the, it doesn't matter what the credit limit is. I just love it.
Yeah, I don't even use it. And the bank says, we don't care if you don't ever use it or you're just doing it for the points. Tomorrow, you could go and max out this credit card. So the amount of people that have like 20K. There you go. It's pretty much spot on. It's nearly 44.5 times. So
It's,
a 10K
I
credit
thought
card.
it was only 3%, but
No,
4.5.
this is like 40. I did one today. It was $42,000 it took off their borrowing capacity with a 10K credit card on 100K income. I was like, and they don't even use it. So I'm like, cut the credit card up. And that's where, if my mandate is from a client is to get them the maximum borrowing capacity, then you've got to be willing to do those things to turn the needle when it comes to how much you can borrow.
How do we achieve multiple properties instead of the typical being limited to two or three properties? So are you seeing a different way that people start their portfolios? Like, is there an ideal way to kick off a portfolio that's going to give us a better shot into the future? Or is it more on the later side of the portfolio where you've got to get a little bit more strategic? Can we be a little willy-nilly at the beginning, or what are you seeing at the start?
Yeah, the earlier you can get it set up from the start, you've got much better chances of scaling up. And to answer that question, what are you doing at the start? It's not putting one deposit for 20% for the first property. We're usually going 12% deposits for the first two. Yes, you're going to pay some mortgage insurance, for example, but now you've got two properties, say, and I'll usually get this, they've got like 100 something grand or equity that we can pull out from the owner rock. And now what we're saying is, let's split that across two properties. Let's go hard in this acquisition phase. Both those properties will increase. In the meantime, let's see if we can get your income up as well to help you buy property three. The first two are generally major lenders as well. So you go to the harder lenders for borrowing capacity at the start. Then what we want to do is strip the equity and then probably go to, if you're capping out from a serviceability side, properties 3, 4, 5, we might be going to non-bank lenders. The rates are higher. But again, we've been able to take those first two properties to up to 90% because we originally paid mortgage insurance. So now we can go back up to 90% again and pay less mortgage insurance and then strip the equity and then go and buy into the next properties as well. So yes, you might be feeling like you're paying mortgage insurance. Yes, the rates are slightly higher, above 80%. But if it means that we can kind of keep scaling properties and buying more of them, that to me is a smarter play. And then there's the discussion on, okay, so what are we buying, through trusts? That's another one. Usually once we get to 3, 4, 5, then we're maybe buying through a self-managed super fund, and then we're coming back to the very start and ripping the equity out of the first 3 or 4.
So the beginning phase looks very much like buy a because the hardest thing to get is the $110,000, $120,000, $150,000 deposit. So it's buying an asset that we can put our $150,000 into, maybe split it into two, and then get a deal that can increase in equity enough to allow us, let's say there's two, one grows half, the other grows the other half, to give you one full equity deposit to go for your third. So doing things a little bit more strategically. Like, do you see people accelerating these things with like renovations or like value add strategies in ways?
Possibly. And I mean, you got to think, because they've used a large chunk of their money, they don't really have the funds to then do the renos. And then the other cost is renos at the moment. That's the other big challenge is the cost to get trades in versus can I just buy something that's, turnkey for an investor? That's a big one.
Right.
The other one that we see a lot of is potentially at the start when we've got maybe the bank, if people are very fortunate to get the bank of mum and dad, then what we do is, okay, use a guarantor to buy property 1, keep your cash to buy properties 2 or 3, and then we can release the guarantor once that's increased in value and can say thank you to mum and dad. So just generally what I find is another one where people have missed the trick going, oh, my parents want to help out. It's like, don't give the cash. Use the equity, finance at 100%, for example, and then you can park your cash in the offset account, which then helps to reduce the repayments, for that time period as well. And that way you put no money down for the first one, and you can put your money down for the second one. Yeah.
So that's actually what I did on my first investment property. We didn't have any money. We had $60,000, $70,000, and that's enough back then was to buy a property. But the goal was to buy multiple properties and increase the equity. So we bought a property for $280,000 with the guarantor loan, and then went back to and did a renovation on it, spent $22,000 on it, and then got the value to 360. and then went back to the bank and said, hey, look, this property is now grown, release the guarantor loan and give me a few dollars of equity, which allowed me to then, save a little bit more and then go for the next one. So it's those types of strategies that you don't really think of, but it's not like for your parents, they don't have to, there's no cash involved. There's the only thing they're risking is this a good investment, which is where, you have a good team around you to make sure that you don't mess it up and get educated. Well, if you're sitting on this session, you're probably trying to get educated in the property space. If you have 3 different brokers and loans, interest only with 3 different banks, is it better to approach each broker to get the best interest rate, or is it better to consolidate and have one broker handle all 3?
Permission to speak freely here, or
yeah, we're in a safe space. There's only 200 people watching, so you're okay.
Why would you have 3 different brokers? That'd be my first thought here. Yeah. So if you're going to find a partner that's really going to help you long term. And I'm not saying this is not self-seeking advice. If you have a great relationship with your current broker, embrace that. Yeah. As a portfolio, if you're one broker, because then you've got the other 2 brokers that are constantly trying to get that business. And it's like they're competing for business, right? Whereas what we should be doing is trying to enable you to buy that next property. And that's where we're trying to get people's focus, is to lift a little bit, to go, if you're just looking down here at the rate, you're missing the point about looking up here for the property growth and the cash flow growth as well. And if your broker's not asking, what are we trying to optimize your portfolio for? Like, what's the end game? That to me is the clincher of the question. And that goes across the buyer's agent, the accountant, the financial planner. What are we trying to get to? And if we can then reverse engineer from that point onwards, awesome. Like, everyone's on the same page about what outcome we're trying to get here. If the outcome's the lowest rate, it's a zero-sum game. And I had this conversation with a client. They're like, what's the lowest rate? And I said, it's Bank of China. And they said, what's the next one? I was like, someone else was like, so you don't actually want the lowest rate, because you don't want to go to, I don't know, it was Bank of China who takes 2 months to look at a deal, right? So there's something that people think they want, and there's the actual thing that they need. And I guess our job is to decipher between the two. Like, what do you really need versus what are you actually saying you think you need as well?
What are those sort of key top 3 sort of things that people should be considering when they're buying their first property, whether it be investment or a PPOR?
Yeah, it's never going to be perfect. Except that, you can do all the due diligence you want, you can have all the spreadsheets you want. The first property is never going to be perfect. But your first car, not that you should be embarrassed of it, but your first car represented freedom, right? The ability to jump in with your mates and go for a drive whenever you wanted. And that's what your first property does. It gets you into the market, and we can see, we just spoke about, it's compounding at anywhere from 5 to 9% year on year. You can't save that much year on year. You just cannot. So the property market would be like forced savings. The next one is it gives you options. You can pull the equity out, you can sell at capital gains free if it's your own home. You're not locked down and locked into this property. You can sell it if you absolutely had to and upgrade. And that, again, it's giving you options there as well. And the next part is the loan is simply the vehicle to buy the property. So don't put all your attention and focus into the loan. Put your attention and focus into the property and the home. That's what you're buying. You're buying the stuff that cannot be moved. So that's what I say. You're renting the loan, you're buying the home, because you can change anything about that property, but what you can't change is the aspect, the block, the location, and that's where you should be putting all your focus in. And the amount of times that they put more energy into, does this loan come with an offset? Does it come with this? What about the rate, the fee? I was like, mate, you missed the point here completely. The loan can be chopped and changed, but the property, overlooking the building and pest, overlooking the contractor sale, that's the stuff that comes and bites you in the bum.
Yeah. It's so true. You need to, and if and this is one of the things I was reading somewhere. Someone said that people spend more time researching a dishwasher than they do researching the property investment that they get. So it's kind of like, well, if you're not going to spend the time that you should be spending researching a property, you can't do that, right? Then use a professional, use smart people that are going to be able to do it for you. I'm not just saying go use a buyer's agent, but it should be the same amount time that you spend on all your professionals, right? Like you should spend a lot of time on finding your broker, a lot of time on finding your accountant, because like Aaron, that whiteboard thing that you just did there, that just saved me $4,500. No, on 100 grand, it's even more. Let's just say that's $5,000 annually. Like that's ridiculous. So if you just spend a little bit of time trying to find the right people, like watching sessions like this.
I have my brother in the UK wants to invest. Can you please ask if he can invest with me in a trust structure? So that trust structure is probably going to be an accountant. Maybe you're going to need to speak to your accountant about costs and all that. Is it possible? I think the other thing I wanted to unpack here, and if anybody's overseas watches or has friends or family who wants to look at this, is what income are they earning in? If they're earning in Great British pounds, that's another challenge, because most lenders will significantly shade that income. So I suppose it depends. But yeah, how would you tackle that one?
Look, challenging. We've done it heaps. People that are offshore, Aussie. So I'm assuming Aussie citizen because he's your brother. So he's an Aussie citizen, so non-resident. What usually happens here is they'll take his UK income, convert it to AUD, shade off 20% from a currency conversion perspective, then apply all the living expenses. So generally what you need is when people are working offshore to be on pretty decent incomes. You get this all the time when people are like the Emirates or Singapore, and they've got tax advantages there, but when an Aussie bank gets their hands on it, they murder it because of the tax as well that they apply to it, and you don't get any negative gearing add backs too. That's the other part where you got to think about a trust as well, as like what benefits you're getting buying through a trust. The benefits aren't necessarily only borrowing capacity, but you got to think about your tax implications there as well. Yeah, not an accountant. The answer is, can you get it done? Yes. To Jeff's point, we just got to pick it apart and go, okay, what's the borrowing capacity going to do, and then what's the reason that we're buying through a trust? Not being a handbrake here. It's just more to go, okay, and is there the want and the desire to keep scaling up the portfolio as well, and how does the borrowing capacity play out with that scenario?
Yeah, because the borrowing capacity needs to play into it of both of them, and if you're splitting them, gets very tricky.
You got a whole question around siblings here, and again, when we get siblings that co-invest, then it's like not only this purchase, but what happens when they want to buy in the future and again after that, because they'll always be lumped in with that debt depending on which bank they go to as well.
What would be the effective way to set debt recycling for shares from a lending perspective, not from an accounting perspective?
So what you could do is you have a separate loan split. So if it's owner occupied, you could create a separate loan split.
Yep.
And let's say, for example, you want to put 50K in shares. So what you do is you split off your home loan and create a separate loan account for 50K. You pay that 50K down and then you draw it back up. And that way, the reason why I say you split it out is then because you can track the interest on that particular loan split. And if people want to invest in shares for 50K, okay, yet we know how much is deductible debt. That's related to our shares. So when when your accountant asks for it, it's pretty clean and neat.